Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Cargo of Bricks. Now this week we turn our gaze southwards and backwards to last February's tumultuous Irish general election, to Sinn Féin's great leap forward, and to the dilemma now faced by 3 separate political parties who've tasked themselves with the job of pulling together Ireland's next government. And to help me unpack some of those dilemmas, I'm joined by Professor Gary Murphy from Dublin City University. To say that the result in the 8th of February was unexpected is a bit of an understatement, Gary. Just talk us through really the main themes of what happened in that election and how it all panned out.
Something happened in the 2 months up to the calling of the election, and political scientists like myself were still trying to figure it out. There are a number of issues. One, certainly housing and health. Sinn Féin did make some significant inroads with their solutions, which are state-led, unquestionably state-led. It's an old-fashioned type of social democratic view that the state should build houses and that the state should abolish private healthcare. But they weren't the only party doing that, so we just can't say that was why Sinn Féin broke through. There was a big controversy over a Royal Irish Constabulary commemoration in January, just before the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar called the election. But into the election itself, we had...
Just before you move on that one, Gary, I think that's a really interesting one, the RIC commemoration, which was proposed and then I think miscommunicated quite badly by Charlie Flanagan just before the election campaign was called. And it seemed to me that nobody really was in control of that story. Fianna Fáil didn't know what to do about it because it's been trying to plot this pluralist kind of, if you like, North-friendly, Unionist-friendly position, which is, in line with its brokering of the Good Friday Agreement, but not necessarily its own historical view of, say, the War of Independence and before that, after that, the Civil War. And it seemed to me that it discombobulated almost everybody except Sinn Féin, who managed to kind of walk in and just kind of wrap their arms around this narrative they've been trying to sell in the Republic, but not really finding any buyers for.
Yeah, I mean, if that controversy had erupted in midterm, let's say, it probably would have been a 2-week story and would have disappeared. When Charlie Flanagan announced it, and I remember he announced it sort of unilaterally, he had an agreement from the state's commemoration committee. There was a dispute there. Nobody paid it terribly much notice until the Fianna Fáil mayor of Clare, a chap called Cathal Crowe, who was later elected TD for Clare, said he wouldn't attend the ceremony. I was rather sceptical, I must say, but I was persuaded by the editor of the journal.ie, it's a very widely read site, as you would know, Mick, in the Republic, Sinead O'Carroll, who told me on a radio show that they had double the amount of readers on a story about the cancellation than they had, for instance, on a very popular political story when Maria Bailey, you might remember, got herself into difficulty over a compensation claim she had lodged, and then got herself into difficulty with the Fine Gael party, so much so that they deselected her. So there was a wide readership and a wide... people were interested in the story. And it did dominate the first week of the campaign, I think. And Mary Lou was very strong on it. And Sinn Féin got certainly a very big boost out of it, no doubt about it. And Fianna Fáil, paradoxically, although it was their candidate in Clare who brought it up, didn't get much of a boost. In many ways, this is the story of the election. They were hoping to win a second seat there, but Crowe basically ended up taking Dooley's seat. And Sinn Féin, rather amazingly, won a seat in Clare. Violet Rynn was the candidate and who got herself into some difficulty afterwards about a story relating to payment or non-payment of rent over the course of the last number of years. But no one had given her a chance. No one gave her an absolute iota of a chance, and she topped the poll and got 9,000 and odd votes. I mean, and that's the extraordinary nature of this election. We saw people often say to me, why do people vote the way they do in Ireland? Is it party attachment? Is it personality? Is it local issues? Is it austerity in the post 2008 era? And certainly in 2020, there is abundant evidence that being part of the Sinn Féin team was really significant. I mean, you have Ryn, you had a candidate in Kildare who was on holidays during the election. You had Sinn Féin winning seats where they'd never won seats before.
So, Gary, that's fascinating. But really, what are the dilemmas now that these three major parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and the Greens, are having to resolve? That's taken 5 months.
Yeah, so it's a numbers game. There's a tyranny in the numbers here, Mick, and it's as follows. There are 160 seats in Dail. You need 80 for a majority, with the Ceann Comhairle being the 81st. And they're miles away, all three parties, Sinn Féin, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Sinn Féin have 37 seats, Fianna Fáil have 37 seats, and Fine Gael have 35 seats. So, and they're the three biggest parties, remember. So to get from 37 to 80 is that's a long way to go, particularly when both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael ruled out automatically after the election entering into any sort of coalition with Sinn Féin.
And we've seen a couple of stages in the negotiations. First of all, between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And when they've got to a point where they think they've got enough of a shared agenda, they've then tried to shoehorn more laterally the Greens into it. But what are the political dilemmas facing two parties that have been desperate rivals really since the beginning of the state?
I mean, Fianna Fáil found it very difficult in 2016 to even support Fine Gael in confidence and supply. So no one should be under any illusion that this is difficult for Fianna Fáil and also for Fine Gael to coalesce with the bitter enemy. Now, people sometimes say, well, what's the difference? And are they really Tweedledum and Tweedledee? To an extent, they're both centrist parties. Fine Gael is slightly on the centre-right. Always had a much more powerful belief in private enterprise than Fianna Fáil. Fianna Fáil were the great statists of Ireland. They believe in the power of the state to, for instance, build houses in the 1930s. They built a whole raft of social housing in the big cities, Dublin and Cork in particular. They did it again in the post-war era in the 1950s, although you had huge emigration, 60,000 people a year emigrating from the Irish Republic, mostly to Britain. And so we shouldn't underestimate the difficulties involved. There are historical factors, but I think there are some policy factors. Principally amongst them is housing. Housing with health were the two main issues in the campaign. And Fianna Fáil has always had a much more statist view of building houses than Fine Gael, which has mostly preferred to leave it to the market. I remember Simon Coveney on Morning Ireland in 2017, I think around this time, around April, May, saying by the end of 2017, there'll be nobody in a hotel room. And there are now still 10,000 people 3 years later. So that's a very important issue. And as far as we know, and I think I can speak with some authority here, the government negotiations between Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and now the Greens, housing is still a difficulty. It's a big difficulty. Fine Gael, I don't think, are as convinced as Fianna Fáil and the Greens that you can simply have the state build houses, because the state has built houses before, and which they quickly became ghettoized. Anyone who travelled through Ballymun, where I worked myself in the university in DCU, they built them in the 60s, high rises, and they were a social disaster. The deprivation has taken decades to overcome.
And I think one thing we could say about the February election was there wasn't an awful lot of nuance around this. In a sense, there was a bit of a bidding war in which Fianna Fáil basically got outbid by Sinn Féin targets that look unrealistic in terms of the fiscal space. But now Fianna Fáil, I think Fianna Fáil assumed that there was going to be a face-off just between them and Fine Gael. And now they're caught in a situation where I know there's a lot of reluctance amongst backbench Fianna Fáilers have been talking at the weekend of basically saying, look, we really need to sit this one out, lads, and and get rid of Micheál Martin and try and start anew. Because basically there is this visceral hatred, dislike of Fine Gaelers. So that's going to be a bit of a torture for them if these negotiations actually work out.
Yeah, but you could say exactly the same for Fine Gael. I mean, Fine Gael were rejected by the electorate in February. They got 22% of the vote. They went from, remember, they got 78 seats in 2011. They were reduced down to 50 in 2016, and now they're at 35. So they're like the chart is only going one way. And there is a strong view within Fine Gael that they should sit this one out and leave Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin coalesce with the Social Democrats, Labour, the Greens, whoever, because that's what the electorate voted for. Now, the problem there, of course, is that Micheál Martin has, in many ways, built his career, and certainly a significant part of it, by antipathy towards Sinn Féin. He is by far the strongest voice in Fianna. He's not alone, but he is by far the strongest voice who has no truck with Sinn Féin. And anyone just before the lockdown who saw the day the Dail first came back would see the antipathy between Micheál Martin and Mary Lou MacDonald. It was visceral in Dail and on that day. Both speeches were laced with vitriol, is the word I would use, Mick. And it's not got any better. There are some within Fianna Fáil who think a mistake has been made here. They would far prefer to coalesce with Sinn Féin. And if the talks failed and we didn't get a government and there was some sort of abeyance, potentially maybe a second election to come in a few months' time, there is a cabal in Fianna Fáil who would happily get rid of Micheál Martin and would try to coalesce with Sinn Féin, the Greens, the Social Democrats, Labour. Because, let's face it, Fine Gael don't have that many coalition partner alternatives themselves. The Social Democrats rule themselves out. Labour rule themselves out. There's a hardcore of leftist independents who won't work with Fine Gael. So this is the problem. Who will work with who? And I must say, I give the Greens some significant credit for at least, to use a baseball analogy, stepping up to the plate and say, yeah, look, we got 12 seats and about 8% of the vote. We have some sort of a mandate. And can we get into government and, get some of our policies, whether this be on transport, whether it be on climate change, reduction in carbon emissions, whether it be on austerity, public housing. So I give them at least some credit for trying to do a deal. Now, whether they can do a deal and the mood music here, Mick, as we speak, is not great. There is obviously, as we know, divisions within the Green Party. Between the leadership. We now have the deputy leader extraordinarily saying she's going to challenge the leader after the negotiations. It's kind of Kafkaesque. It's quite bizarre, but that's the way it's been done. But she is still at the center of the negotiations. So, we can talk about that if you want, because it's a big issue about whether the Greens, A, will sign up for it, and B, whether they can get it passed.
Can you sort of summarize for us a little bit what the challenges and moreover, the opportunities for the three parties that are seriously negotiating to form a government are, and what are the dilemmas they're going to have to grasp?
Well, the big difficulty is trying to get some sort of agreement that the three parties can sign up to in good faith, that they can present A, to their own party's membership, and then B, to the electorate itself. And that is a huge challenge in the COVID era, because all the money that was promised in January and February at the election has dissipated into the pandemic payment to basically keep the economy afloat. Now, Ireland is not unique in this. This is happening all across Europe, so maybe there might be some Euro bond into the future that can fix this. But the money that was promised for massive building of houses particularly, but also to fix the perennial difficulties in the health service is not existing. And in one way, there is a crisis of democracy here simply because of the government is lasting so long, or the current government, even though 3 of its members had been voted out of the parliament by the people. So even getting, and the story here now is that the document is now 100 pages. So it seems to be pretty detailed enough, but whether it can get past the memberships is a very difficult issue. The Greens particularly need a 2/3 majority, and they've had a lot of recent influx of young people into the party. And these are not just climate activists. These are what we would call in the old days good old hardcore, social activists who are worried about poverty, austerity, climate change, homelessness, direct provision, the big issue here in the Republic.
So I heard it said their watermelon's green on the outside, red on the inside.
That's a very good description, and I think it sums them up. Because there certainly has been a move to the left here in Ireland since the 2008 crash. Unquestionably, we can see it in the Fine Gael vote. And Sinn Féin, whatever they might tell you themselves, they in their heart they know their big increase in February was not to do with the reclamation of the Fourth Green Field or Irish unity or border polls or any of that. It was basically to do with their position on housing and homelessness and the health services. And they had very good spokespeople, Eamon Ryan, Louise O'Reilly in health, David Cullinan in Waterford, who got a huge vote, and Mary Lou MacDonald herself. I mean, this is not the Sinn Féin of Jerry Adams, who was a liability, sorry, Mick, in 2011 and in 2016 as leader. This is a different Sinn Féin. It's kind of a socialist Sinn Féin, and that's what was attracting young people to it. That's what attracted those voters in Clare, Kildare, Galway West, all over the country. So that's the first issue for the Greens, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, is negotiating a program for government that they can sell to their parties and to the electorate.
But what's in it for the government parties? Because that all sounds very scary, right? And in some respects, what you say about Sinn Féin, I think, really is what stymied. It's the other side of what stymied Fianna Fáil, because Fianna Fáil, I think, Micheál Martin, I think, you could say, had been carefully trying to build a centre-left agenda, so that his plan, it seems to me, was to come in at the end of that and head a centre-left coalition and exclude and push out Sinn Féin. Now it has to go in with small government, traditional small government, Fine Gael. How's that going to come together in such a way, and what's their motivation for making it work?
So the Fianna Fáil motivation is quite simple. They haven't been in government since 2011 and they want to be back in it. And Micheál Martin particularly wants to be Taoiseach. And yes, you're quite right, Mick. The Fianna Fáil game plan for general election 2020 was predicated on them getting in the high 20s percentage-wise and getting over 55 seats. Some people thought they were going to get 60. I never thought that, but I thought they would get closer to 50 than less than 40, which is what they got. And then that was predicated on that big vote would get them a coalition with the Greens, the Social Democrats, and Labour, and some independents. It would keep Sinn Féin out, and it would keep Fine Gael out. And of course, they didn't get the votes. They got a decent first percentage, but not enough. And they got very little transfers. They completely fell apart on the second day of counting, the Monday. So what's in it for them? They just got to get into government, because if they stay in opposition, they'll become increasingly irrelevant. People voting for the first time in 2020 wouldn't remember the glory days of Fianna Fáil, even in the 90s under Bertie Ahern, and I mean glory days in terms of electoral success. I'm not making any other value judgments. But they'll become increasingly irrelevant unless they're in government. I think that's the critical point there. For Fine Gael, I think under Leo Varadkar would have went into opposition if they thought Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin would have got it together with some of the smaller parties, because, as I said earlier, their vote has collapsed. In 2011, they were close to an overall majority. Now they only have 35 seats. And I do think Fine Gael always has had the sort of, now, in one way, many people see it as a superior view, but of standing by the state. And I think they feel, they should be in government. Simon Coveney particularly is keen to stay in government. Pascal Donoghue the same. But there is some division in Fine Gael, because remember, they had before the election was called, they had 12 ministers. They're going to go down to 6 at the most in any coalition. And then just to finish, the Greens, it's a huge call for them. I mean, there's no getting away from it. This is fundamental stuff. 2011, they came out of the 27-11 Fianna Fáil Green government, lost all their 6 seats, had a disastrous time. The electorate punished them, and Eamon Ryan slowly built them back. But he's got no love for it in one way because of this leadership challenge. But it's in one way it's an existential decision. Should we go in and try and make a difference, or should we stay out and snipe from the sidelines? And going in, there are rewards being in government. We've had governments elected in Ireland before, but you can bet your bottom dollar the criticism, the vitriol they will get from the opposition, particularly from Sinn Féin. This is for the Greens if they go in, will be extraordinary, and they'll have to have tough skins. And I would say, I think if Micheál Martin, who is their chief negotiator and the deputy leader who's challenging Eamon Ryan, if she comes out and says, I am happy to sign up to this deal, I think she will be able to persuade the membership to go along with it. So, I mean, if a deal is done by the parties, I think it will get passed. But I wouldn't be putting any significant sums of money or my mortgage on it by any means. So we still remain in somewhat perilous waters, Mick.
Well, just a final thought from you, Gary. And that all sounds like not just an existential decision, but actual political purgatory. So what's the payoff? Just quickly go through all 3 potential government partners and tell us what you think the payoff's going to be for each one.
Well, let's start with the Greens. The payoff is, can they get the 7% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per annum? Can they get that passed? I mean, they won't get it passed in opposition. That's the first thing. They won't get it passed in opposition. They will have no input into climate change decisions. And it's like, that's what the grown-ups do. They get into power and they do things. And I think that's what they have to do. Fine Gael, it's basically the numbers have fallen that it doesn't allow them to go into opposition really, given their stance with Sinn Féin and Fianna Fáil's stance with Sinn Féin. So I think their view is they sort of have to do it, and they'll worry about the consequences afterwards. Fianna Fáil, it's Micheál Martin's last chance. He's desperate to be in the Taoiseach's office, and I think going into opposition with a resurgent Sinn Féin offers no hope for Fianna Fáil. So their hope is get in and do a decent job, fix housing, fix health. These things can be done, and that's the payoff, really.
And of course, Leo gets his second term, at least promised second term, as Taoiseach, which would be historic for a Fine Gael Taoiseach. Is that correct?
No. Like Enda Kenny was historic in 2016 by becoming the first Fine Gael Taoiseach to be re-elected, and now you'd have Fine Gael in power for a third successive term, which is again extraordinary in Irish terms and unprecedented. But we live in unprecedented times in politics here in the Republic of Ireland. It's all dates back. The fluidity in Irish politics dates back to the crash. Fianna Fáil, just before the bank guarantee scheme, just to finish on this note, 42% in the polls, won 42% in the 2007 election. The latest poll last week gave them 14%, down 7%, 8% from the general election. The polls here in Ireland are very odd at the moment. Fine Gael are at 34%, Fianna Fáil are at 14%. There's a view in Fine Gael they should go to the country again.
Cargo of Bricks is brought to you by Slugger O'Toole, Northern Ireland's leading source for independent news, insight and analysis. Support us by hitting the donor box button at sluggerotoole.com.